I came to the lawyer's office with tears still damp on my cheeks, clutching the settlement check from my husband's death like it was poison. The man behind the desk asked if I wanted to set up a trust, a retirement account, something safe for myself. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice shaking but certain. I want to give it all to my son. He's my family. He'll know what to do with it. My name is Margaret. I'm 61 years old, and I've lived most of my life as a wife, a mother, and a woman who believed that family was the truest form of wealth. I worked for 35 years as a school secretary, and though the pay wasn't grand, it gave me enough to put food on the table and shoes on my son's feet. My husband, George, carried the heavier burden, working in the factory until the day his lungs gave out. When he died, I thought my own lungs would give out too. That insurance settlement was meant to keep me safe for the rest of my days. But in my heart, I couldn't see it as mine alone. I saw it as seed money for the future, a chance for my son, David, and his new wife, Claire, to have the stability George and I had never truly known. David had always been a charmer. Broad-shouldered with the same cleft chin his father had, he could make anyone laugh in an instant. Claire was younger, with a brightness in her eyes that made her seem like she'd been born lucky. When they married that summer, I stood in the front pew clutching my bouquet thinking, at last my boy has someone to love him as much as I do. So when the check arrived in the mail, heavy with zeros, I thought of them first. I thought of the way Claire had mentioned wanting a house, a place with a yard where their children, my future grandchildren, could play. I thought of David's tired voice on the phone, talking about how rent was draining them, and I thought, what good is money if not to help the ones you love most? That night, I invited them over for dinner. The roast chicken filled the house with George's favorite smell, rosemary and butter crisping in the oven. We sat at the table, candlelight flickering. I told them about the settlement. David's fork clattered against his plate. Mom, that's a lot of money. I know, I said softly. And I don't need it. Not really. The house is paid off. My pension keeps me fed. But you too, you're just starting out. I want you to have it, to build something of your own. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, eyes shining. Margaret, we can't accept that. But her words trembled with excitement, not refusal. David leaned forward, his hand gripping mine. Are you sure, Mom? This is life-changing. I smiled, my throat tight. I'm sure. It's what family does. We take care of each other. They hugged me so hard I nearly lost my breath. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the quiet house, George's photograph staring down at me from the mantel. I did the right thing, didn't I? I whispered to him. His eyes, frozen forever in that photograph, seemed to say nothing at all. The next morning, I met them at the bank. I endorsed the check, sliding it across the desk. Claire squeezed my arm. We'll make you proud, Margaret. This is for all of us. I believed her. God help me. I believed every word. I walked out of that bank lighter as though I had laid down a burden. I thought of Christmases to come in their new house, of birthdays celebrated in a backyard I had helped them buy. I thought of grandchildren laughing while I rocked in a chair, the sun warming my face. It wasn't until much later that I realized what I had really done that day. I hadn't just given them money. I had handed them my trust, my security, my very future. And once it was in their hands, I would never get it back the same way again. But that night, I slept with a smile, convinced that the sacrifice was love, and that love would be returned. I was wrong. The first time I felt something was off, it was nothing more than a small tremor in the air. I had gone to the grocery store on a Tuesday morning, armed with my shopping list and the habit of decades. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee, my cart rattled along the tiled floor the way it always had, and when I reached the register, I slid my debit card through the reader with the same practiced flick. Declined. I blinked at the screen as though my eyes had misread it. The cashier, a young girl with a braid down her back, gave me a small, uncomfortable smile. Do you want to try again? I did. Declined again. Heat rose up the back of my neck. My pension account always had enough. Always. I scrambled for my smaller wallet, where I kept a few bills in case of emergencies, and paid in cash, my hands shaking as I stuffed the groceries into bags. When I got home, I logged into my account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant before typing in my password. And then I stared. Empty. Not just low, Not just a mistake. Empty. My life savings, what George and I had scraped together over 40 years, gone. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, the numbers on the screen swimming. I whispered it out loud as though speaking might make it real. There's nothing left. I called David. My voice was tight, the words tumbling. David, my account, it's all gone. Every penny. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the hum of traffic in the background, the faint clink of a coffee cup. Then his voice came, casual, too casual. Yeah, Mom, I moved it. We needed it for the down payment. Remember? We talked about using everything for the house. My throat dried. Everything? David, that was my savings. Not just the settlement, our savings, your father's and mine. He sighed, like I was a child making a fuss. It's all the same, Mom. Family money. You'll be living with us, right? What difference does it make if it's in your account or mine? It's for all of us. My chest clenched. The words stung, not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like my whole life's work was just loose change tossed in a jar. David, I whispered, you should have told me. I didn't want you stressing over the details, he said quickly. Look, Mom, don't worry. You'll have a room in the new place. It's going to be great. Trust me, trust me. Those two words hit me harder than the empty bank account. Because they were the same words George had once said when he took an extra shift, when he put aside a few dollars into savings, when he told me everything would be okay. From George, they had been a promise. From David, they sounded like a shield, something meant to silence me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. The house creaked around me the same way it always had. My husband's picture looked down from the mantel, the smile on his face frozen in a moment of pride and joy. I wanted to ask him if we had raised our son wrong, if all those years of sacrifice had planted seeds in barren soil. I cried, not the loud kind of sobbing, but the quiet tears that come when you're too tired to fight, the kind that leave your chest hollow. The next morning, David and Claire came by to show me pictures of the house they were considering. Claire's eyes sparkled as she spread the glossy pages across my kitchen table. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Look at this kitchen. Granite counters, and the backyard perfect for barbecues. David stood behind her, his arm draped across her shoulders, smiling like a man who had conquered the world. It's exactly what we need, Mom. Exactly what you've always wanted for me. I tried to smile. Tried to swallow the bitterness burning in my throat, but my eyes kept drifting back to the photo of the master bedroom, the words owner's suite printed beneath it. It wasn't mine. None of it was mine. As they chattered on, I felt myself drifting away, like a ghost in my own kitchen. They were building a future out of my past, and I wasn't sure there'd be any place left for me in it. After they left, I pulled out the shoebox from under my bed, where George and I had once kept our emergency cash. Empty, too. I ran my hands along the edges of the box as though money might suddenly appear, but all I felt was the brittle cardboard. That was the moment it hit me. Not just that I had no savings left, but that I had no control. I had trusted my son with everything, and he had taken it without a second thought. I thought of George's hands, scarred and strong, lifting boxes at the factory. I thought of the nights we went without so David could have new cleats for football or money for his class trip. I thought of every sacrifice, every penny pinched, every dream deferred. And I realized they weren't memories anymore, they were ashes. I closed the shoebox, slid it back under the bed, and whispered into the silence, what have I done? Because love had led me here. Love and trust, and now both felt like fool's currency, spent and gone. I closed the shoebox, slid it back under the bed, and whispered into the silence, what have I done? The new house was beautiful. I'll admit that much. It stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, 2 stories tall with white siding and blue shutters that gave it the charm of a picture on a real estate brochure. The grass was freshly mowed, the air filled with the faint smell of paint and wood polish. On the surface, it looked like the dream we'd always talked about, the one George and I never could afford. David walked me through it like a proud salesman. This is the family room, Mom. Look at the fireplace. And over here the kitchen. Isn't it perfect? Claire trailed behind, smiling, her high heels clicking against the hardwood. It'll be so nice to finally have our own place, she said. Our own place. The words lodged in me like a splinter. They had insisted that I move in with them. "It's your money too, Mom, of course you'll be with us." But as I followed them from room to room, I couldn't help but notice how they spoke. Everything was ours. Not once did David say your room, Mom, or this will be your space. When we reached the second floor, David opened the door to a smaller bedroom at the end of the hall. "This one's for you," he said. "We'll put your dresser here. Plenty of space for what you need." It was smaller than my old bedroom back home. The closet was barely wide enough for my coats, and the window faced the neighbor's siding instead of the backyard. Lovely, I forced myself to say, though my stomach twisted. I moved in with them the following week, hauling my clothes and a few boxes of keepsakes. George's photo came with me, of course, and I set it on the nightstand in that little room at the end of the hall. I tried to tell myself it was just a new chapter, that I'd grow to love this house the way Claire did. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. The first sign was dinner. I had cooked all my life meals that kept George strong and David growing. So on my first night there, I made a roast with potatoes, the kind of meal that felt like home. Claire pushed the food around her plate, smiling politely but hardly eating. "It's good," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. The next night, she ordered takeout. "We're too tired to cook," she explained. David agreed, his mouth full of noodles. I sat at the table with my plate of stir-fry, feeling like a guest in my own family. Then came the matter of privacy. Claire began leaving subtle hints, closing their bedroom door when I passed, whispering with David in the kitchen, her laughter cutting off when I entered the room. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "Yes, she's here. All the time. I mean, she's nice, but it feels like we don't have our own space." Her voice was a dagger, sharp and precise. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just adjustment, the way families always need time to settle into new rhythms. But then, one morning I opened the mailbox and found a bill from the utility company addressed only to David and Claire. No mention of my name anywhere. That night I brought it up. "David, why isn't my name on the bills? I put in the money for this house too." He frowned, annoyed. "Mom, don't worry about it. We've got it handled. You don't need to be stressing over paperwork." But I did worry. I worried enough to make an appointment with a lawyer, quietly, without telling them. Sitting in that office, the lawyer, a kind man with gray hair and a calm voice, listened as I explained how the money had been used, how all my savings had disappeared, how they had promised the house was for all of us. He leaned forward. "Do you have proof of your contribution?" "Yes," I whispered, pulling the receipts from my purse, my hands trembling. "Then we can put your name on the deed. Co-ownership. It means you have legal rights to the property. Without it, you have nothing." The word nothing rang in my ears. So I did it. Quietly, firmly, I had my name added. When I left his office, I felt the first flicker of strength since George's passing. They might not know it yet, but I was no fool. Back at the house, I said nothing to David or Claire. I smiled when they talked about decorating, nodded when Claire gushed about painting the walls. But inside, I held on to that piece of paper like a secret weapon. Because already, I could feel the ground shifting. The smiles were thinner, the laughter shorter. Claire left earlier for work, David came home later, and the conversations between them grew sharper when they thought I wasn't listening. And then, one night, barely a month after moving in, David sat me down at the kitchen table. Claire stood behind him, her arms folded. "Mom," he began, his tone careful, "we've been talking, and we think it would be better if you had your own place again, just for a while. We need our privacy. You understand, don't you?" The words hollowed me out. I had given them everything. Everything. And now they were asking me to leave. Claire's eyes avoided mine. David reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. "I understand," I said, though my voice shook. That night, I packed my bags. George's photo went back into its box, my clothes folded with trembling hands. I moved back into my old house, the one George and I had once called home. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like exile. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing in, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly abandoned. My son, the boy I had raised, The man I had trusted with my very future had cast me aside like an old coat no longer in fashion. And though I tried to close my eyes and sleep, one thought burned like fire in my mind. This is not the end of me, but for weeks it felt like it was. The silence of my old house pressed down on me in ways I had never known before. Every creak in the floorboards, every tick of the clock, every sigh of wind against the windows reminded me that I was alone, not because life had taken people from me, but because the very person I had given everything to had pushed me aside. I thought widowhood was loneliness. No, widowhood was grief. This was betrayal. I spent the first days moving through the house like a ghost. The kitchen was too large for one person, the living room couches too wide, the bed too empty. I'd catch myself setting out 2 cups for coffee before remembering George was gone, 3 plates for dinner before remembering David and Claire didn't eat here anymore. Then I'd put the extras back and sit down, the food tasting like dust in my mouth. Nights were worse. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with memories. George coughing in the dark, whispering that everything would be all right. David as a boy, tiptoeing in with a nightmare, curling against me while I stroked his hair. All those nights of care and love. And now the man, the boy had become, had told me, in so many words, that I was in the way. I tried to reason with myself. He's newly married, young. They want privacy. It's natural. But then the sharper truth cut through. They used me. They took my money, my savings, my future, and when I had nothing left to give, they shut the door in my face. I found myself crying in the strangest places. In the aisle of the grocery store when I passed the coffee brand David liked. In church, when the pastor spoke about honoring your parents. Even at the post office, when I overheard a young woman on the phone telling her mother she loved her. Shame joined the grief. Shame that I had been so blind. That I had believed Claire's bright eyes and David's reassuring voice. That I had handed them not just my money but my trust. Without once stopping to protect myself. One afternoon, I visited the new house, our house, though they didn't see it that way. I told myself I just wanted to drop off some mail that had come to my address by mistake. When I pulled up, Claire's car was in the driveway, shiny and new. David's truck too. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. No answer. I rang again. Through the window, I could see movement, Claire, peeking through the blinds, then stepping back quickly. My heart stuttered. I waited, nothing. Finally, I left the envelope on the porch and walked back to my car, my legs trembling. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Claire opened the door, snatched the envelope, and shut it again. They hadn't even wanted to face me. That night, I sat in the living room, George's photo in my lap. "You'd know what to do," I whispered, running my thumb over the frame. "You'd tell me how to fight." And then, for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. A flicker, a spark. Because I remembered, my name was on that deed. The lawyer had seen to that. They might have thought they had shut me out, but I still had rights. That realization didn't erase the hurt. It didn't stop the ache in my chest or the tears that still came without warning, but it gave me something else purpose. I began small. I dug through my files, gathering every receipt, every statement, every document tied to the settlement and my savings. I laid them out across the dining table like puzzle pieces, proof that what had been done wasn't just cruel but unlawful. When the loneliness pressed too hard, I wrote in a journal, spilling the words I couldn't speak out loud. They betrayed me. They used me. But they won't end me. At church, I began listening more closely to the sermons. The words about justice, about God seeing every hidden act, fell into me like seeds. I wasn't powerless. Not yet. One evening, I called the lawyer again. His voice was steady, reassuring. "You have more power than you realize, Margaret," he told me. "Don't let them make you feel like you don't." I hung up the phone with my hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from the rush of something I hadn't felt in months. Resolve. The breaking point wasn't one single moment. It was a slow dawning, like the sun creeping up after a long night. I still hurt. I still grieved. But somewhere inside me, a voice began to whisper louder than the pain. "You are not done. You are not finished, and you will not be forgotten." And as that voice grew, so did the first outlines of a plan. I started quietly, the way an old woman like me knows how. Not with shouting, not with threats. No, I began with paper. Piles and piles of paper. The dining room table became my battlefield. I spread out the bank statements, the insurance settlement records, the receipts for every dollar I'd saved and spent. My hands shook sometimes, but I forced myself to keep going. I highlighted, underlined, wrote little notes in the margins. Each page felt like a stone, heavy with proof of my trust and of their betrayal. At first, I thought maybe I was being petty. Maybe I was just a mother too proud to admit she'd been wrong. But then I'd remember the sound of Claire's voice on the phone, saying I was there all the time. I'd remember David telling me, as though I were a child, not to stress over the details. I'd remember that closed door, that moment they pretended not to hear me at the house I had bought, and the shame in my chest would harden into something sharper, determination. I knew better than to rush. David had always been quick, impulsive. He'd run headlong into things, confident that his charm or his grin would smooth it over. I wasn't like that. I was deliberate, careful. I'd lived long enough to know the value of patience, so I plotted in silence. I called the lawyer again and set up a series of meetings. Each time I brought another stack of papers, another piece of the puzzle. He listened, nodding, his pen scratching across his yellow pad. "You've got a strong case," he told me more than once. "This isn't just a family dispute. This could fall under fraud and elder abuse." Those words rattled around in my head. Fraud. Elder abuse. I'd never thought of myself that way, as someone who had been abused. But that's what it was, wasn't it? They hadn't just made a mistake. They had taken advantage of me, deliberately, knowing I trusted them more than anyone else in the world. The lawyer encouraged me to stay quiet, to keep things normal until we were ready. So I did. When David called once a week, his voice cheerful but distant, I answered politely. When Claire sent a text about some piece of mail, I replied with a simple thank you. I didn't let on that I was building something bigger behind the scenes. I also began visiting the courthouse, sitting quietly in the back of hearings, listening to the way lawyers argued, the way judges weighed evidence. I told myself it was to learn, but in truth, it was also to harden myself, to remind myself that I wasn't too old to fight. In the evenings when the loneliness pressed in too heavy, I wrote letters, not to David, not to Claire, to George. "George," I scribbled one night, "you always said I had more strength than I knew. Well, I'm going to have to find it now. I'm going to stand up, not just for me, but for the life we built. They can't take that from us." I folded the letters and tucked them into the shoebox that once held our emergency money. Empty of dollars, it became full of words. My own secret account. But plotting wasn't just legal work and letters, it was also about preparing myself. I began taking walks every morning, even when my knees ached, to clear my head and build my resolve. I started cooking for myself again, real meals as though feeding my body was a way to remind my spirit it was worth nourishing. And slowly, the despair began to loosen its grip. One afternoon, as I walked past the park, I saw a group of children playing tag, their laughter filling the air. I stopped and sat on a bench, watching them run. Once, I had thought of grandchildren filling my days. Now, I knew better. My future wouldn't be built on waiting for others to give me scraps of joy. My future would be my own. By the time spring warmed the earth, my plan was nearly ready. The lawyer had filed the paperwork, and the case was slowly winding its way into motion. I had signed the documents that confirmed my co-ownership of the house, securing my right to act if I chose. And I chose. I didn't know exactly what would happen when the case reached court, or how David and Claire would react when they realized the house wasn't solely theirs. But I knew one thing with certainty. They had underestimated me. They thought I was a frail, grieving widow who would fade quietly into the background. They didn't know I had been sharpening my resolve with every sleepless night, every tear, every humiliation. I was no longer just a mother aching from betrayal. I was a woman preparing for justice, and though the road ahead would not be easy, I felt George's voice echo in my heart. "Trust yourself, Margaret. You're stronger than you think." I sat at the table one evening, the last of the sunset spilling across my papers, and whispered into the quiet, "I'm ready now." Because the time for plotting was nearly over, the time for action was coming. The first strike came quietly, like the first drop of rain before a storm. I didn't announce it. didn't give them warning. I simply signed the papers my lawyer placed in front of me, filings that would send shockwaves through David and Claire's perfect little world, a case of fraud, elder abuse. Words that would cling to them no matter how they tried to scrub them off. When the summons was delivered, I wasn't there to see it. But I imagined Claire opening the door, her manicured fingers tearing the envelope, her smile curdling as she read my name listed as plaintiff. I pictured David's jaw tightening, the color draining from his face, his voice rising in disbelief. And though I didn't witness it, I felt it. Like a tremor through the air, a shift in the balance. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't powerless. A few days later, David called. His number flashed on my phone, and for a long moment, I considered letting it ring. But I answered, my voice steady. Mom, what the hell is this? His words tumbled out hot and fast. You filed a lawsuit? Fraud? Elder abuse? Do you have any idea what this could do to us? I took a slow breath, letting silence hang for a beat before I spoke. Yes, David. I know exactly what it could do. That's why I filed it. He sputtered. We're family. Families don't do this to each other. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice to stay calm. Families don't drain each other's savings either. Families don't kick their mothers out of the house they paid for. You stopped treating me like family the moment you decided my worth ended when my bank account did. There was a pause on the other end. For the first time, I heard something crack in his confidence. Then, softer, Mom, you don't understand. We just wanted a life, we needed the money. I closed my eyes. And what did you think I needed, David? Did you ever ask? He had no answer, just a sharp breath, then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time after, the phone heavy in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I felt something far stronger than either of those vindication. The legal process moved slowly as it always does. Court dates, filings, responses. But in the meantime, I held another weapon they hadn't realized. My name on the deed. One bright April morning, I walked into the real estate office with my papers in hand. The agent, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, flipped through them and nodded. Yes, Mrs. Inque onset about this, please. Carter, you absolutely have the right to sell. With co-ownership, you don't need their permission. You'll get your portion of the proceeds. Her words felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then let's list it, I said, my voice firm. By the time David and Claire found out, a sign was already staked in their manicured front yard, for sale. The call came that evening, Claire, not David this time. Her voice was shrill, panicked. Margaret, what are you doing? You can't sell our house. It's not just your house, Claire. It's mine too, and I've decided I don't want to own it anymore. She gasped, as though I had slapped her. You'll ruin us. Do you understand? We put everything into this place. I almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. No, Claire, I put everything into this place. You just spent it. There was a long silence before she spat. You'll regret this, and hung up. But I didn't regret it. Not for a moment. The weeks that followed were filled with small, delicious victories. I drive by the house occasionally, catching sight of Claire pacing the porch with her phone pressed to her ear, her face pinched. David, shoulders slumped, hauling boxes into the garage as though preparing for the inevitable. Their shiny new life, crumbling brick by brick. Neighbors began to notice. A woman at church whispered that she'd seen the sign in front of David's house. Is everything all right, Margaret? She asked gently. I smiled, a thin, knowing smile. Everything's finally becoming right, I answered. For the first time in months, I felt the balance tipping back toward me. Not because I wanted to destroy them, I still loved my son, somewhere deep beneath the hurt, but because I wanted them to understand, to feel, if only for a moment, what it was like to be powerless, discarded, betrayed. And yet beneath the satisfaction, there was sadness too. Each night when I returned to my quiet house, I'd sit by George's picture and tell him what had happened that day. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, I'd whisper. But I know I can't let them walk all over me anymore. Not after everything we gave. I imagined George nodding, his eyes twinkling with that mix of pride and sternness he'd carried through our marriage. I imagined him saying, Stand tall, Margaret. You've earned it. And so I did. By early summer, the cracks in David and Claire's world were wide open. The lawsuit drained them, attorney fees mounting, their savings drying up as fast as mine once had. The house, still unsold, loomed like a burden instead of a blessing. One afternoon, I ran into David outside the courthouse after a hearing. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his suit wrinkled. When he saw me, his face shifted between anger and desperation. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "please, can't we stop this? We're drowning." Claire's furious. I don't know how much more we can take." I studied him for a long moment. This was the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the man I had once trusted with everything, and now he stood before me, stripped of his bravado, begging. "You should have thought of that," I said softly, "before you left me with nothing." His mouth opened, then closed. No more excuses, no more charm. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy. As I watched him go, I felt both sorrow and strength. This was only the beginning, because the storm I had started was far from over. And when it was done, they would learn what it meant to betray a woman who had given them everything. The storm broke sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after that courthouse encounter, the house finally sold. Not for the glossy, inflated price Claire had boasted it was worth, but for a number that stung them far more than it touched me. By the time the papers were signed and the proceeds distributed, I walked away with a tidy sum that restored the savings they had stolen from me, and then some. When my lawyer handed me the check, I stared at it for a long time, running my fingers over the numbers as though they might disappear. A wave of relief washed through me, followed by something darker, sharper. Satisfaction. "This is yours," my lawyer said, her tone firm. "You fought for it. Don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for taking back what was stolen." I nodded. "I won't." And for the first time, I believed it. David and Claire, on the other hand, were drowning. The house sale left them scrambling, barely breaking, even after their endless renovations, loans, and attorney fees. And the lawsuit still loomed, a storm cloud darkening their every step. Word had spread through town. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisle. "That's Margaret Carter, sued her own son. Can you imagine?" But there was no malice in their voices, only curiosity, sometimes even admiration. One afternoon, Mrs. Bell's. Latham, a neighbor from my old street, stopped me by the apples. "I heard what happened," she said softly, pressing my hand. "You're braver than I'd ever be. Don't let them drag you down." Her kindness warmed me. For months I'd felt alone, but now I realized I wasn't the one on trial in the eyes of the community. David and Claire were. The first real hearing came in late July. I remember standing in that cool, echoing courtroom, my hands folded neatly in my lap, while David sat across the aisle with Claire beside him. She looked tired, her hair less polished than usual, her expression tight with barely hidden rage. David's face was pale, his jaw set. The judge's voice filled the room, outlining the claims. Misappropriation of funds, financial elder abuse, fraud. The words rang out like bells tolling for them. Claire whispered fiercely into David's ear. I could almost imagine her words. "Fix this. Make it go away." But he couldn't. Not anymore. My lawyer presented the evidence bank statements showing my accounts, drained documents proving my name on the deed, testimony of how they had invited me to invest in a house only to shove me out. Each fact landed like a stone in the pond, rippling outward. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I rose slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. "I'm 61 years old," I began, my eyes fixed on the bench. "I spent my life working hard, raising a son I believed would stand by me in my later years. When my husband died, I gave everything I had left to help David and his wife build a future. Instead, they used me. They emptied my accounts without my knowledge. They pushed me out of the home my husband's life insurance paid for. They left me with nothing but loneliness." The courtroom was silent. My voice quivered, but I forced the final words out steady. "I loved my son more than life itself, but love does not give anyone the right to abuse. Love does not excuse betrayal." When I sat down, my hand shook, but the judge's gaze softened ever so slightly, and I knew I'd been heard. The weeks that followed were brutal for David and Claire. Their attorney fees ballooned. Their savings dwindled. They were forced to move into a small apartment on the edge of town, a far cry from the grand home they thought they'd secured forever. I drove past that apartment complex once, rusting balconies, peeling paint. Laundry hung out to dry. I wondered how Claire's pride survived there. It wasn't schadenfreude I felt. It was justice. The balance had been restored. By autumn, the case reached its crescendo. My lawyer called one evening with the news. They've agreed to settle. They can't afford to keep fighting. The terms will favor you. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The settlement would cover the rest of my losses, along with damages for the suffering they'd caused. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the acknowledgement, the admission, however reluctant, that they had wronged me. Still, a part of me mourned. This was my son. The boy I had sung to sleep, the man whose wedding I'd attended with tears of joy, and now we stood on opposite sides of a courtroom. But sometimes, mourning and justice live side by side. The final hearing was almost anticlimactic. Papers signed, the agreements entered, the gavel struck. David and Claire walked out of the courthouse ahead of me, their faces tight, their shoulders slumped. Outside, the autumn wind whipped through the trees. David turned once, as though he might speak. But he didn't. He just looked at me, his eyes hollow, then walked on. I stood on those courthouse steps, the leaves swirling at my feet, and felt an unexpected peace settle over me. This chapter of suffering was done. The revenge, if you could call it that, had already played out in full. They had lost their house, their money, their pride. And I had regained not only what was stolen, but something far greater, myself. Barely 2 weeks after the settlement, there was a knock at my door one crisp Saturday morning. I had just finished my tea and was humming an old tune George used to love when the sound echoed through the house. At first I thought it might be the mailman, but the knock came again, harder this time. Reluctantly, I set down my cup and went to the door, and there they were. David and Claire, standing on my porch, their faces a mirror of defeat. David's suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hair uncombed in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Claire looked worse, her makeup smeared, as if she had been crying, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness. They didn't look like the proud couple who had once paraded me through the empty shell of their dream home. They looked like people stripped bare. "Mom," David began, his voice low, raw. "Can we come in?" For a moment, I considered shutting the door, just turning the lock and walking away. But I didn't. I stepped aside, wordless, and they shuffled into the living room. They didn't sit at first. They just stood there, awkward and heavy, like children summoned to the principal's office. Finally, David lowered himself onto the couch, and Claire followed, perching on the edge as if the cushions burned. The silence stretched until David broke it. "Mom, we've lost everything." His voice cracked. "The house? The savings. Our credit's ruined." Claire lost her job. I'm barely holding on to mine. We don't have anywhere else to go. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "We thought we could handle it, Margaret. We thought it would all work out, but we were wrong. We need your help." Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating, desperate. I sat across from them, my hands folded in my lap. My heart ached, not with pity, but with the ghost of old love, the memory of the son I once knew. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to reach out, to gather him into my arms like I had when he scraped his knee as a boy. But then, I remembered the night they told me to pack my things and leave the house I had paid for. I remembered the empty bank account, the cold dismissal, the way they had looked at me like a burden. That memory steadied me. "I see," I said quietly. David leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Please, Mom, just help us get back on our feet. A loan, a place to stay, anything. We'll pay you back." Claire sniffled, clutching at his arm. "We're family, Margaret. Families stick together." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. Instead, I rose slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the golden autumn leaves drifting across the yard. When I turned back, my voice was calm, almost gentle. "You're right, Claire. Families should stick together. But you taught me something very important this year." They looked at me expectantly, hope flickering in their eyes. I took a deep breath. "You taught me that love without respect is nothing. that loyalty means little when it's only demanded, never given. And you taught me that sometimes family can hurt you worse than strangers ever could. David's face fell, his lips parting as if to argue. But I held up my hand. I gave you everything, I said, my voice firmer now. Not just money, not just savings. I gave you my trust, my faith, my heart. And you threw it all away when it no longer suited you. You left me with nothing, David. Nothing but a cold, empty house and the ache of betrayal. Claire's tears spilled over, but I didn't falter. So no, I continued softly. I won't help you. Not this time. You'll have to face your troubles the way I had to face mine alone. The words hung between us, heavy and final. David's face crumpled, his jaw working as though he might lash out. But instead, he buried his head in his hands. Claire sobbed quietly beside him. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel glee. What I felt was release. For the first time in years, I wasn't chained to their choices. I wasn't sacrificing myself for their happiness. I was free. Eventually, they left. David mumbled something about figuring it out, his voice broken, his shoulders slumped. Claire didn't look at me as she walked out the door. When the house was quiet again, I sank into my chair and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. George's picture sat on the mantel, his familiar smile looking down at me. I whispered to him, "It's done now. I've finally chosen myself." And in that moment, I felt him with me, not in sorrow, but in pride. The days that followed were lighter than I'd ever imagined. I reopened old doors I'd once shut tight. I joined a book club at the library. I started tending a small garden out back, watching life push up through the soil in tender shoots. I even took a trip George and I had always dreamed of. Nothing grand, just a weekend by the coast, the sea air filling my lungs, the horizon stretching wide and endless. For the first time since his passing, I wasn't weighed down by regret or loss. I was living, truly living. Sometimes, late at night, I thought of David. I wondered if he cursed me for my refusal, or if, deep down, he finally understood. I wondered if he'd ever find his way back to the man he used to be. But those were his battles now, not mine. My story didn't end in despair. It ended here, in peace, in freedom, in the quiet knowledge that I had reclaimed myself. Because sometimes, justice isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes, it's simply choosing not to let those who hurt you define the rest of your life. And that's what I did. I chose me. And I'll never regret it.